The old convent sat on a quiet hill, surrounded by oak trees that had watched over it for generations. Inside its stone walls, life moved slowly, peacefully, like a river that had found its natural course. Morning prayers, afternoon chores, evening hymns, day after day, year after year, the rhythm never changed. But there was one sound that made everything different. Every evening, just as the sun began to set, music would fill the chapel. Not just any music, but the kind that makes you stop whatever you're doing and listen. The kind that reaches into your chest and squeezes your heart just a little. Sister Catherine was the one playing. She was 83 years old with silver hair tucked neatly under her habit, and hands that showed every one of those years. Her fingers were bent and swollen from arthritis, the joints large and painful. Sometimes her hands shook when she held her prayer book. But when she sat at that old upright piano, something magical happened. She had been playing that piano for 60 years. 60 years of the same worn keys, the same squeaky pedal, the same crack in middle C that gave every note just a slight buzz. She knew that instrument better than she knew her own face. Every scratch, every imperfection, every way the humidity made certain keys stick in summer. Before she became a nun, music had been her whole world. As a young woman, she had played in small concert halls and church gatherings around her hometown. People would come just to hear her play, closing their eyes and letting the music wash over them. Her teacher had told her she had a gift, something special that couldn't be taught. It was just in her, the way some people are born knowing how to make others laugh or how to heal the sick. When she was 23, she made a choice that surprised everyone who knew her. She gave up her piano performances and entered the convent. Her mother had cried, begging her to reconsider. "You have such talent," her mother had said. "You could play in the great concert halls. You could make a name for yourself." But the young woman had smiled peacefully and explained that she wasn't giving up music at all. She was just changing her audience. Instead of playing for crowds who clapped and went home, she would play for God, and for her sisters in faith who needed beauty in their simple, quiet lives. She had kept that promise for 6 decades. Every evening she played. Bach, Chopin, Beethoven, old hymns that had been sung for centuries, and sometimes simple folk songs from her childhood. The other nuns would finish their chores a little early, just so they could sit in the chapel pews and listen. Some of them had been hearing her play for 30 years or more. They couldn't imagine their lives without that music. Sister Catherine never complained about the arthritis, even though everyone could see it was getting worse. Her hands hurt all the time now, not just when she played. Simple tasks like buttoning her habit or holding a pen had become difficult. But she kept playing, because the music mattered more than the pain. Then came the accident that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in late autumn. Sister Catherine had just finished playing and was walking back to her room. The chapel had 3 stone steps leading down to the hallway, steps she had climbed thousands of times. But that evening her knee gave out suddenly. One moment she was walking, the next she was tumbling forward, unable to catch herself. She didn't fall far, but she hit hard. The other nuns rushed to help her up. Nothing was broken, thank God, but she had badly bruised her hip and scraped her hands. The palms that had just been creating beautiful music were now scraped raw and bleeding. Mother Helen, who ran the convent, helped Sister Catherine to the infirmary. She was a kind woman, Mother Helen, but she was also practical and deeply concerned about the safety of all her nuns. As she bandaged Sister Catherine's hands, she made a decision that she truly believed was for the best. "We need to talk," Mother Helen said gently. "About the piano." Sister Catherine looked up, confusion in her tired eyes. "You're not as steady on your feet as you used to be," Mother Helen continued, "and your arthritis is getting worse. I've watched you wince when you play. I've seen how much pain you're in." "The music is worth it," Sister Catherine said quietly. "But what if you fall again? What if next time you break something? You could hurt yourself seriously." Mother Helen's voice was full of genuine worry. "I think it's time we found other ways for you to contribute, safer ways." Sister Catherine felt her stomach drop. "Are you saying I can't play anymore?" "I'm saying we need to be realistic about your limitations. You're 83 years old. It's not giving up, it's being wise." Over the next few days, Mother Helen made arrangements. The piano bench was moved to storage. Sister Catherine was assigned to other tasks that didn't require much standing or walking. Folding altar cloths, sorting through donated books for the library, leading prayers from a comfortable chair. Everyone meant well. The other nuns would pat her hand and tell her she'd done enough, that she'd earned her rest. Some of them even seemed to think she'd be relieved not to have to play anymore, not understanding that the music wasn't a duty she performed, but a need as essential as breathing. The first week without playing was the hardest. Sister Catherine would wake in the mornings and for just a moment forget. Then she'd remember, and the day would feel heavier somehow. She went through her new routines mechanically, smiling when expected, praying when scheduled but feeling hollow inside. The chapel felt different now too. A younger nun, Sister Grace, tried to play simple hymns during evening prayers. She was enthusiastic but inexperienced, hitting wrong notes and losing her place in the music. Sister Catherine would sit in the pews, her damaged hands folded in her lap, listening to mistakes she could have corrected in her sleep. Each wrong note was like a small knife to her heart. She never said anything, of course. She had taken vows of obedience. Mother Helen had made her decision out of love and concern. Sister Catherine understood that. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. Months passed. Fall turned to winter. The oak trees outside the convent lost their leaves and snow covered the ground. Sister Catherine continued her simple tasks, speaking when spoken to, smiling when appropriate. But the other nuns noticed the change. The light in her eyes had dimmed. She seemed smaller somehow, as if part of her had folded in on itself. One of the younger nuns, Sister Rose, mentioned it to Mother Helen one day. "She's fading," Sister Rose said with concern. "Since she stopped playing, it's like watching a candle slowly go out." Mother Helen had noticed it too, though she tried to convince herself otherwise. Sister Catherine was just adjusting, she told herself. It would get easier with time. But in her heart she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. She had protected Sister Catherine's body but hadn't considered what the silence might do to her soul. The old upright piano sat in the chapel, played occasionally by well-meaning but unskilled hands. And Sister Catherine sat in the pews, her arthritic fingers sometimes moving silently in her lap, playing songs only she could hear. The music was still in her, locked away now with no way out. She had given up fame and recognition decades ago to serve God through her music. But now she had been asked to give up the music itself, and that, she was discovering, was a sacrifice she didn't know how to make. The convent was quiet now in the evenings. Peaceful, some would say, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. It was the quiet of something missing, of a voice that had been silenced, of a gift that had been carefully, kindly, but firmly put away. And no one knew that this silence would soon be broken in a way that would reach far beyond the stone walls of the old convent, beyond the oak trees and the quiet hill, all the way around the world. Winter turned to spring, and the oak trees around the convent began to bloom again. But inside those old stone walls, Sister Catherine remained in her own personal winter. She smiled when she was supposed to smile. She participated in prayers and helped with simple chores, but anyone who really looked could see that something vital had gone out of her. She had stopped humming while she worked. That's what the other nuns noticed most. For years, Sister Catherine had hummed bits of melodies as she went about her day. Little fragments of Beethoven while setting the table, a few bars of an old hymn while folding linens. Now there was only silence. At night, alone in her small room, she would sometimes hold her hands up in the darkness and move her fingers as if playing invisible keys. The arthritis made them ache constantly now, but the muscle memory was still there. Her hands remembered what her heart couldn't forget. Mother Helen watched all of this with growing unease. She had made her decision to protect Sister Catherine, and she still believed it was the right one. The last thing they needed was another fall, another injury. But she hadn't expected this slow fading, this quiet grief that seemed to be consuming the elderly nun from the inside out. Meanwhile, in the city about 20 miles from the convent, a young television producer named Claire was having the worst week of her career. Her boss had just rejected her third-story pitch in a row, telling her she needed something fresh, something with heart. The station's ratings were dropping, and they needed content that would make people actually care. Claire sat in her cramped office, scrolling mindlessly through local news and social media, looking for anything that might spark an idea. She was 29 years old and had been working at the station for 4 years, always hoping for her big break. But every story she pitched seemed to fall flat. That's when she stumbled across a comment thread on a local community page. Someone had posted asking if anyone remembered the nun who used to play piano at St. Catherine's Convent. Another person replied that yes, they remembered, Their grandmother used to take them to evening prayers just to hear the music. Then someone else chimed in saying they'd heard the nun wasn't allowed to play anymore because she was too old. Claire read through the thread with growing interest. There was something there, she could feel it. A talented musician forced to give up her passion. An elderly woman dealing with limitations. It had all the elements of a human interest story that could really connect with people. She did some quick research and found out that St. Catherine's Convent had been in the area for over 100 years. The nun in question had been playing piano there for 6 decades. 6 decades of music just stopped. Claire felt a tug in her chest. This was the kind of story that mattered. The next morning, she pitched it to her boss. A short segment about hidden talent in the community, about aging and dignity and the gifts we sometimes take for granted. Her boss, a gruff man named Tom who had seen everything in his 30 years of television, actually looked interested. "All right," he said, "but you'll need to get permission from the convent and, more importantly, from the nun herself. No ambushing elderly women with cameras. We do this respectfully or we don't do it at all." Claire drove out to the convent that same afternoon. The building looked exactly like she'd imagined, old and peaceful and somehow outside of time. She knocked on the heavy wooden door, her heart beating faster than it should have been. This felt important somehow, bigger than just another segment for the evening news. Mother Helen answered the door herself. She was cautious at first, protective of her nuns and their privacy. Claire explained her idea carefully, emphasizing that it would only happen if Sister Catherine wanted to participate. She wasn't interested in exploiting anyone. She just thought Sister Catherine's story deserved to be told. Mother Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she invited Claire inside. They sat in a small visiting room while Mother Helen explained what had happened. The fall, the arthritis, the difficult decision to stop Sister Catherine from playing. Claire listened carefully, taking notes but mostly just paying attention to the pain in Mother Helen's voice. "I thought I was protecting her," Mother Helen said quietly. "But I'm watching her disappear bit by bit. She won't say it, but I think the music was more important to her than I realized." Claire asked if she could meet Sister Catherine just to talk. No cameras, no pressure, just a conversation. Sister Catherine came into the visiting room slowly, leaning on a cane that Claire hadn't known she needed. She was smaller than Claire had expected, fragile-looking with that kind of elderly woman thinness that makes you want to feed them soup. But her eyes were still sharp, still intelligent, even if they did look tired. Claire introduced herself and explained her idea. She wanted to feature Sister Catherine in a segment about community talents. But more than that, she wanted to give Sister Catherine a chance to play again if she wanted to. Just once. For the camera. For the community. For herself. Sister Catherine's hands began to tremble, and Claire worried she'd said too much, pushed too hard. But then she realized the old nun wasn't trembling from fear or weakness. It was emotion, raw and powerful, breaking through 60 years of practiced composure. "I don't know if I still can," Sister Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My hands hurt all the time now." "I might have forgotten how, or you might not have," Claire said gently. "And either way, wouldn't you like to find out?" Sister Catherine looked down at her gnarled, arthritic hands. She had been obedient for so long. She had accepted the decision to stop playing without complaint. But now someone was offering her permission to try again, and the longing was so strong it almost hurt. Mother Helen, who had been sitting quietly during this exchange, spoke up. "If Sister Catherine wants to do this, she has my blessing. I should have asked her what she wanted before I decided for her. That was my mistake. The decision was made." They would film the following week. Claire would bring a small crew, just 2 people and basic equipment. They would set up in the chapel, and Sister Catherine would play whatever she wanted to play. No script, no direction, just music. The news spread through the convent like wildfire. The younger nuns were excited. The older ones were worried but hopeful. Sister Rose, the one who had first mentioned Sister Catherine's fading to Mother Helen, volunteered to help clean the chapel and make sure everything was perfect. Sister Catherine spent the next week in a strange state between terror and joy. At night, she would lie awake wondering what piece she should play. During the day, she would catch herself moving her fingers again, but now with purpose instead of just grief. The music was coming back to life inside her. She chose Chopin, a nocturne she had learned as a girl of 16, long before she ever thought about becoming a nun. It was beautiful and melancholy and technically challenging. Her teacher had told her it was too advanced for her age, but she'd practiced for months until she could play it perfectly. That was 67 years ago. Could she still do it? Would her hands cooperate? Would the pain be too much? She didn't know. But she was going to try. The other nuns noticed the change in her immediately. That light in her eyes had come back. She was humming again while she worked, bits and pieces of the Chopin nocturne testing her memory. Sister Rose heard her singing softly in the garden one afternoon and started crying right there among the tomatoes. So grateful to have the old Sister Catherine back. The week passed both too quickly and too slowly. Sister Catherine was nervous in a way she hadn't been in decades. She was 83 years old and she was about to perform again. Not in a concert hall like she had as a young woman, but in her chapel, for a camera that would share her music with people she would never meet. The night before the filming, she knelt in prayer for a long time. She didn't pray for perfect playing or freedom from pain. She just prayed for the courage to try, and for her hands to remember what her heart had never forgotten. Tomorrow would tell whether 60 years of silence could be broken, whether arthritic hands could still create beauty, whether it was possible to reclaim a gift you thought you'd lost forever. She went to sleep that night both terrified and more alive than she'd felt in months. The piano was waiting. The music was waiting. And somewhere beyond the convent walls, a world she didn't even know about was waiting too. The morning of the filming arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that felt almost like a blessing. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the chapel, painting rainbow patterns across the old wooden pews. Sister Catherine had barely slept, but she didn't feel tired. She felt something else entirely, something she couldn't quite name. Claire arrived early with her small crew, just as promised. 2 people, both quiet and respectful, moving their equipment carefully through the sacred space. They set up one camera on a tripod, another handheld for close-ups, a small microphone near the piano. Nothing invasive, nothing that would make the moment feel like a spectacle. Sister Catherine watched from the doorway as they worked. Her hands were shaking again, and this time it wasn't just the arthritis. What if she had built this up too much in her mind? What if the music that sounded so perfect in her head came out broken and wrong when she actually tried to play? Sister Rose appeared beside her as if sensing her fear. "You've played that piano for 60 years, she said softly. "It knows you. Your hands know it. Trust that." One by one, the other nuns began filing into the chapel. They filled the pews quietly, reverently, as if this were a special mass. Some of them were crying before anything had even happened. They had missed Sister Catherine's music more than they had let themselves admit. The chapel had felt empty without it, no matter how many cheerful hymns Sister Grace had attempted. Mother Helen was the last to enter. She caught Sister Catherine's eye and gave her a small nod. There was apology in that nod and permission and hope, all the things that had been missing for the past few months. Claire approached Sister Catherine gently. "We're ready whenever you are," she said. "No rush, no pressure. Just play when it feels right." Sister Catherine nodded. She made her way slowly down the center aisle, her cane tapping against the stone floor. Each step felt monumental. The piano waited at the front of the chapel, the bench back in its proper place. Someone had polished the old instrument. The wood gleamed in the colored light from the windows. When she reached the piano, she stood there for a moment, just looking at it. 60 years of her life were in this instrument. Thousands of prayers played out in music, joy and sorrow and everything in between, all expressed through these yellowed keys. She handed her cane to Sister Rose and lowered herself onto the bench. It creaked slightly, the same creak it had made for decades. The sound was comforting, familiar. She was home. Her hands hovered over the keys. They looked so old now, so worn and bent. The arthritis had twisted her fingers into shapes that seemed impossible for playing. The joints were swollen and red. Just holding them up like this hurt. The chapel was completely silent. Even Claire had stopped moving, her camera lowered slightly as if she too was holding her breath. Sister Catherine closed her eyes and said a silent prayer. Then she placed her hands on the keys. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major emerged into the chapel like birds taking flight. Soft, gentle, almost hesitant, Sister Catherine's fingers found the notes slowly at first, relearning the pathways they had traveled so many times before. The muscle memory was there, buried under months of silence but not gone, never gone. She could feel every joint protesting. The pain was real and immediate. But so was the music. And the music was stronger. As she played, something remarkable happened. The hesitancy faded. Her fingers began to move with more confidence, more certainty. The piece was coming back to her not just technically but emotionally. She remembered playing this as a young woman, before she ever thought about God or convents or growing old. She remembered the pure joy of making something beautiful exist in the world where it hadn't existed before. The arthritis was still there. She could feel it in every movement. But her hands had played through worse things than pain. They had played through grief when her mother died. They had played through doubt when she first entered the convent and wondered if she'd made a mistake. They had played through the simple exhaustion of 60 years of the same routine. Pain was just another thing to play through. Claire stood behind her camera, and for the first time in her career, she forgot she was working. She forgot about ratings and segments and what her boss would think. She was just a person in a chapel, listening to an 83-year-old nun create something so beautiful it made her chest ache. The nuns in the pews weren't even trying to hide their tears anymore. Sister Grace, the young nun who had been struggling to play simple hymns, wept openly. This was what music was supposed to sound like. This was what she had been trying to achieve and couldn't, because it took more than just hitting the right keys. It took a lifetime of practice and love and understanding. Sister Catherine's face was serene as she played, but if you looked closely, you could see the concentration. You could see the slight winces when certain passages required movements that her arthritis particularly objected to. But you could also see the joy, pure, undiluted joy that seemed to radiate from her like light. The Chopin Nocturne is not a short piece. It flows and builds and tells a story all its own. There are quiet moments that feel like whispers, and powerful moments that swell with emotion. Sister Catherine played it all, every note, every nuance. Her hands remembered everything. When she reached the final measures, the ones that fade away like a sigh, like letting go of something precious, she played them with such tenderness that several nuns actually gasped. The last note hung in the air of the chapel for what felt like forever, suspended in the colored light from the stained glass windows. Then silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. This wasn't the silence of something missing. This was the silence of something complete, something perfect, something that needed no words after it. For a long moment, nobody moved. Sister Catherine kept her hands on the keys, her eyes still closed as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Her fingers hurt terribly now, throbbing with pain that would probably last for days. She didn't care even a little bit. Then the chapel erupted, not with applause because that didn't feel right in a sacred space, but with something else. The nuns stood, their faces wet with tears, their hands clutched to their chests. Some of them rushed forward to embrace Sister Catherine. Others stayed in their pews, too overcome with emotion to move. Mother Helen made her way to the piano. She knelt down beside the bench, taking Sister Catherine's swollen, painful hands in her own. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I should never have taken this from you." Sister Catherine smiled at her, that same peaceful smile she had given her mother all those years ago when she announced she was entering the convent. "You were trying to protect me," she said. "I understand. But some things are worth the risk." Claire was still filming, capturing all of this. The reunion between Sister Catherine and her music. The emotion of the other nuns. The way Mother Helen cried as she held those arthritic hands. This was no longer just a news segment. This was something else entirely. Something Claire knew was special, even if she didn't yet understand how special. Sister Rose helped Sister Catherine stand and handed her the cane. The old nun's legs were shaky, and her hands were trembling badly now from the exertion. She would need to rest, probably for the remainder of the day, but the light in her eyes was blazing. As the nuns began to file out of the chapel, talking quietly among themselves about what they had just witnessed, Claire approached Sister Catherine one more time. "That was incredible," Claire said, struggling to find words adequate to what she'd just experienced. "The world needs to hear this." Sister Catherine looked puzzled. "The world?" Claire smiled. "I'm going to air this segment, but I think it's going to be bigger than just our local station. I think people everywhere are going to want to see this." Sister Catherine shook her head, slightly amused. "I'm just an old nun playing an old piano." But Claire knew better. She had been in journalism long enough to recognize something truly special when she saw it. This wasn't just about music or aging or overcoming limitations. This was about the human spirit refusing to be dimmed. This was about gifts that don't fade even when bodies do. This was about courage and beauty and the things that make life worth living. She packed up her equipment carefully, thanking the nuns for their hospitality. As she drove away from the convent, she kept thinking about Sister Catherine's face while she played. That expression of pure joy mixed with obvious pain, that determination to create beauty no matter what it cost. Claire had come looking for a good story. She had found something much more powerful than that. Back in the chapel, Sister Catherine sat alone on the piano bench for a few more minutes. Her hands hurt more than they had in months. Tomorrow would be worse. She knew that, but she had played. After all those months of silence, she had played, and it had been worth every single moment of pain. The music was back, and this time, nobody was going to take it away. Claire spent the entire next day editing the footage. She had been planning to create a 3-minute segment for the evening news, something short and sweet to fill the local interest slot. But as she watched the video over and over, she realized she couldn't cut it down that much. Every moment mattered. Every expression on Sister Catherine's face told part of the story. She ended up with a 5-minute piece. Her boss, Tom, raised his eyebrows when she showed it to him. 5 minutes is an eternity in local news, he said, but then he watched it. And when it was over, he was quiet for a moment before nodding. "Run it," he said. "Run the whole thing." The segment aired on a Tuesday evening at 6:30, right after the weather report. Claire had titled it simply, "Sister Catherine Plays Again." She sat at her desk in the newsroom watching the broadcast on the monitor, wondering if anyone out there was actually paying attention. The station's phone lines lit up within minutes. People calling to say they were crying in their living rooms, asking if they could visit the convent to hear Sister Catherine play in person, wanting to know more about her story. The station's website crashed from too many people trying to watch the video online at the same time. By midnight, someone had posted the segment on social media. By morning, it had been shared 10,000 times. By the afternoon, 50,000. The numbers kept climbing in a way that seemed almost impossible. Claire's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News stations from other cities wanted to run the story. Morning shows wanted to interview Sister Catherine. Her boss was ecstatic, calling it the biggest story the station had ever produced. But Claire just kept refreshing the video, reading the comments that were pouring in from everywhere. A woman in Japan wrote that she had given up violin 5 years ago because of hand tremors, and Sister Catherine had inspired her to try again. A retired doctor in Canada said he'd watched the video 3 times and cried every time. A young music student in Brazil wrote that she had been complaining about having to practice. But after seeing Sister Catherine play through obvious pain, she would never complain again. The video jumped from local news to regional news to national news in less than a week. Major networks picked it up. International outlets translated it into different languages. Within 2 weeks, more than 3 million people had watched an 83-year-old nun play Chopin in a small chapel on a quiet hill. At the convent, the nuns had no idea what was happening at first. They didn't spend much time online. They didn't watch television except for special occasions. Their days continued as they always had, with prayers and hors and simple routines. But then the letters started arriving. Dozens at first, then hundreds. People writing to thank Sister Catherine for inspiring them. Parents writing about children who had seen the video and suddenly wanted to learn piano. Elderly people writing about gifts they thought they'd lost forever, but were now reconsidering. A woman wrote about her mother who had dementia and hadn't responded to anything in months. But when they played Sister Catherine's video, her mother had smiled and moved her fingers as if playing along. A man wrote about surviving a stroke and losing the use of his left hand, saying that watching Sister Catherine struggle with arthritis but play anyway had given him the courage to start physical therapy again. The letters came from every continent. They came in English, Spanish, French, German, languages the nuns couldn't even identify. Sister Rose, who was better with technology than the others, set up a simple email account so people could write digitally too. The messages never stopped coming. Concert pianists wrote to praise Sister Catherine's technique. One famous performer, someone whose albums sold millions, wrote that he had watched the video before every performance now because it reminded him why music mattered. It wasn't about fame or perfection. It was about truth and beauty and the courage to create despite everything that tried to stop you. Medical journals wrote articles about Sister Catherine's case. Doctors who specialized in arthritis wanted to know her story, wanted to show the video to patients who were giving up. Occupational therapists used it in their sessions. The video became a case study in determination, in the difference between what's medically difficult and what's actually impossible. A piano manufacturer in Germany, a company that had been making instruments for over 100 years, reached out to the convent. They wanted to donate a special piano to Sister Catherine, one designed specifically for people with arthritis. The keys would require less pressure. The action would be smoother. It would make playing easier, less painful. Mother Helen accepted on behalf of Sister Catherine, who was overwhelmed by all the attention. The old nun couldn't understand why so many people cared about her playing. She had just done what she loved. She had just played the piano like she'd done thousands of times before, but that was exactly why people cared. In a world that felt increasingly complicated and harsh, Sister Catherine had reminded everyone of something simple and true. That beauty matters, that our gifts don't expire just because we get old, that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is try, even when it hurts, even when we're scared, even when everyone has told us to stop. The video kept spreading. 6 months after it first aired, it had been watched over 20 million times. It showed up in church sermons and college lectures. Teachers showed it to students. Therapists showed it to clients. It became one of those rare pieces of content that transcended the usual boundaries of the internet. People made reaction videos, filming themselves watching Sister Catherine play, capturing their own tears and amazement. Artists created paintings inspired by the image of her gnarled hands on the piano keys. Musicians recorded their own versions of the Chopin Nocturne, dedicating them to Sister Catherine. A documentary filmmaker wanted to make a full-length film about her life. A publisher wanted her to write a memoir. A talent agency wanted to book her for concert tours. The requests were endless and often absurd. Sister Catherine politely declined everything that would take her away from the convent or turn her into some kind of celebrity. But she did agree to one thing. The convent, with Mother Helen's blessing, started holding weekly public concerts. Every Sunday afternoon, people could come to the chapel and hear Sister Catherine play. The donations from these concerts were substantial, and Sister Catherine insisted they be used to start a music program for children in the community who couldn't afford lessons. The first Sunday they opened the chapel to the public, over 200 people showed up. They sat in the pews and on folding chairs brought in from the dining hall and stood along the walls. They came from the local town and from cities hours away. They came because they had seen the video and needed to experience the music in person. Sister Catherine played for 45 minutes that day, her arthritic hands moving across the keys of her new piano. It was easier than the old upright, but it still hurt. She still had to rest her hands between pieces. She still winced at certain passages. But the pain was worth it for the faces she saw in the audience. An elderly man in the front row cried through the entire performance. After, he told Sister Rose that he had been a pianist too, before a car accident damaged his hands. He had thought his musical life was over, but seeing Sister Catherine play despite her arthritis had made him think maybe he could find a way back to it. A young girl, maybe 9 years old, asked her mother in a loud whisper if she could start taking piano lessons. The mother, who looked tired and worn down by life, smiled for the first time in what seemed like ages and said yes. These were the moments that mattered to Sister Catherine. Not the millions of views or the articles in prestigious publications. The actual people right in front of her being changed by music, being reminded that beauty still existed in the world and that they could be part of creating it. Claire came to one of the Sunday concerts, several months after her initial video had aired. She stood in the back of the chapel watching the scene she had helped create. Sister Catherine was playing. The audience was transfixed, and Claire understood that she had stumbled into something much bigger than a news story. She had documented a moment of pure human courage and perseverance. She had captured something that people everywhere needed to see. A reminder that our gifts and our passions don't have expiration dates stamped on them. After the concert, Sister Catherine spotted Claire in the crowd. The old nun made her way over slowly, and the two women embraced. "Thank you," Sister Catherine said quietly, "for giving me permission to play again." Claire shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I didn't give you anything. You already had it. I just held up a mirror so everyone else could see it too." The video was still spreading. still being discovered by new audiences. It would continue to spread for years, becoming one of those timeless pieces of content that parents showed their children and teachers showed their students. The elderly nun who played piano despite everything, despite age and pain and being told to stop. Sister Catherine had spent 60 years playing in relative obscurity, creating beauty for a small community of nuns in a quiet convent. Now her music had reached millions, and the message was clear to everyone who heard it. It's never too late. The gift is still there, and the world still needs your song. The attention was strange at first. Sister Catherine had lived 83 years in relative quiet, and suddenly the world seemed to know her name. Reporters still called regularly. People showed up at the convent hoping to meet her. Her video was being shown in schools and hospitals and retirement homes around the world. But Sister Catherine handled it all with the same grace she brought to everything else in her life. When journalists asked for interviews, she agreed to a few, but always redirected the conversation. She didn't want to talk about herself. She wanted to talk about music, about faith, about the importance of using whatever gifts you've been given for as long as you're able. "I'm not special," she told a reporter from a national magazine. "I'm just an old woman who plays piano. The only difference is that someone filmed it and other people happen to see it. But there are gifts like mine everywhere, in every town, in every community. We just have to pay attention." The reporter, a woman who had interviewed presidents and celebrities, found herself moved to tears by Sister Catherine's humility. She wrote an article that focused not on Sister Catherine as an individual phenomenon, but on what her story represented, the countless elderly people whose talents were being wasted, the societal tendency to put older people aside, assuming they had nothing left to offer. That article sparked conversations in nursing homes and senior centers across the country. Activities directors started asking their residents what they used to love doing, what gifts they had set aside. A man in Oregon picked up watercolor painting again after 40 years. A woman in Maine started writing poetry. A retired teacher in Texas began tutoring students again, rediscovering her love of helping young minds grow. Sister Catherine's impact rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. But she wasn't focused on any of that. She was focused on her Sunday concerts and, more importantly, on the children. The music program she had started with the concert donations grew quickly. At first, it was just a few kids from the local town, children whose families couldn't afford private lessons. Sister Catherine taught them herself, her arthritic hands guiding their small fingers across the keys of practice keyboards the program had purchased. Teaching was harder than playing, in some ways. It required more patience, more repetition, more energy than she sometimes had, but watching a child's face light up when they finally mastered a difficult passage made every ache worthwhile. One of her students was a boy named Timothy, 10 years old, from a family struggling to make ends meet. He had never touched a piano before Sister Catherine's program, but he took to it with natural talent that reminded her of herself at that age. She spent extra time with him, teaching him pieces that were technically beyond his level, because she could see he was ready for the challenge. Timothy's mother came to Sister Catherine one afternoon with tears in her eyes. "He practices for hours every day," she said. "He's a different kid since he started learning from you. He has something to work toward now, something to be proud of." These were the moments Sister Catherine treasured. Not the viral video or the articles or the fame, the actual lives being changed right in front of her, the real children learning that they could create beauty in a world that often felt harsh and difficult. Mother Helen watched all of this with a mixture of joy and regret. She had made a public statement months earlier, acknowledging her mistake in stopping Sister Catherine from playing. It had been a difficult thing to do, admitting fault so publicly, but she felt it was necessary. "I learned something important," she had said in a recorded message that Claire had aired. "Sometimes in our desire to protect people, we take away the very things that give their lives meaning. Sister Catherine needed to play piano more than she needed to be safe from falling. I should have asked her what she wanted instead of deciding for her." That statement had resonated with caregivers and family members everywhere. People struggling with aging parents, trying to balance safety with dignity and independence. The question became not just what we think is best for people we love, but what they think is best for themselves, what risks they're willing to take to keep living fully instead of just safely. Sister Catherine continued her Sunday concerts for 2 years. Her arthritis got worse, slowly but steadily. There were Sundays when she couldn't play at all, when the pain was too severe and her hands simply wouldn't cooperate. On those days, her students would perform instead, playing the pieces she had taught them while she sat in the front pew and listened with pride. But on the days she could play, she played beautifully. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for just 20 minutes before she needed to rest. The audience never complained. They were grateful for whatever time she could give them. The video continued its life online, being rediscovered by new audiences every few months. A teacher in Australia showed it to a class studying perseverance. A therapist in Sweden used it to help a patient dealing with a new disability. A grandfather in Mexico showed it to his grandchildren to explain why he was taking up guitar again after decades away from music. Sister Catherine turned 85, then 86. Her health remained relatively stable, though everyone knew that at her age each day was a gift. She kept teaching her students. She kept playing when she could. She kept being the same humble, graceful woman she had always been, even as the world continued to celebrate her story. One afternoon, about 2.5 years after Claire had first filmed her, Sister Catherine was working with young Timothy when she felt an unusual tiredness wash over her. She finished the lesson but told Sister Rose she needed to lie down for a while. By evening, it was clear something was wrong. The doctor came and confirmed what everyone feared. Her heart was failing. It had been strong for 86 years, but it was finally giving out. There was nothing to be done except make her comfortable. Sister Catherine accepted this news with the same peaceful grace she brought to everything. She asked only one thing. Could they move her bed so she could see the piano from where she lay? They moved her to a small room off the chapel, positioning her bed so she had a clear view of the piano through the open door. For 3 days, she drifted in and out of consciousness while the nuns took turns sitting with her. On the second day, young Timothy came to visit. He sat at the piano and played the Chopin Nocturne, the same piece Sister Catherine had played in the viral video. He made a few mistakes, but his heart was completely in it. Sister Catherine opened her eyes and smiled, tears running down her weathered cheeks. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Keep playing, Timothy. Always keep playing." On the morning of the 4th day, with spring sunshine streaming through the stained glass windows, Sister Catherine passed away peacefully. Sister Rose was holding one of her hands, those remarkable hands that had created so much beauty despite so much pain. The news of her death spread quickly. The video that had made her famous was shared millions of times again, this time with tributes and memories. People who had never met her mourned. The children she had taught were devastated. Timothy didn't speak for 2 days. Her funeral was held at the convent, but they had to set up speakers outside because hundreds of people came. Students she had taught. People who had attended her Sunday concerts. Strangers who had been moved by her video and felt compelled to pay their respects to a woman who had reminded them that age doesn't diminish worth. Claire spoke at the funeral, talking about the day she first met Sister Catherine. "I thought I was giving her an opportunity," Claire said, her voice breaking, "but really she gave one to me. She showed me what real courage looks like, what grace looks like, what it means to live fully right up until the end." The convent continued the music program in Sister Catherine's name. Donations poured in, enough to expand it to serve even more children. The special piano she had been given was designated for teaching, so her students could continue learning on an instrument their teacher had played. Timothy, the boy with natural talent, continued his lessons with a teacher from the city who volunteered her time in Sister Catherine's memory. Years later, he would earn a scholarship to a prestigious music conservatory. He would become a concert pianist himself, and he would always tell people that an elderly nun with arthritic hands had been his first and most important teacher. The video never stopped circulating. Every few months it would trend again as new audiences discovered it. Parents showed it to children. Teachers showed it to students. It became one of those timeless pieces that transcended the moment it was created. Because Sister Catherine's story wasn't really about piano, or even about age and determination. It was about something deeper and more universal. It was about the human need to create, to contribute, to matter. It was about refusing to let circumstances define us. It was about the truth that our gifts don't come with expiration dates unless we let them. Her grave in the small cemetery behind the convent has a simple headstone, just her name, her years, and one line: "She played beautifully." But her real legacy isn't in stone. It's in every person who watched her video and decided to try again, to pick up the paintbrush or the pen or the instrument they had set aside, to believe that it wasn't too late, that they still had something to offer, that their song still deserved to be sung. It's in the children who learned that arthritis and age and pain are obstacles, but not walls, that you can create beauty despite difficulty. That grace and courage looked like an 83-year-old woman placing swollen hands on piano keys and playing anyway. It's in the lesson she taught without meaning to, the one that reached around the world and continues reaching still, that we are never too old, never too broken, never too far past our supposed prime to offer our gifts to the world. Sister Catherine lived 86 years. For 60 of them, she played piano in obscurity. For the last 2.5, the world finally noticed. But she would tell you if she could that nothing really changed when the video went viral. She was just doing what she had always done, playing music, creating beauty, using her gift. The only difference was that finally someone filmed it, and the world, which badly needed the reminder, got to see what determination and grace and undiminished passion look like. Her hands rest now, but the music continues.